Coming to you from the dining room table at East Barbary Lane, welcome to a very special edition of Full Circle, the podcast.
I am your host, Charles Tyson Jr.
And I'm your host, Martha Madrigal. Our guest today is an award-winning journalist and our friend who took an incredibly important discussion around our nation. To my mind, their book coming out tomorrow is one of the most important books, if not the most important book of 2024. The book is American Teenager: How Trans Kids Are Surviving Hate and Finding Joy in a Turbulent Era. Nico Lang, welcome to the Full Circle table.
Thanks. It's so good to be here. Such a long time coming.
I know. We were just talking about, so we met last year at the LGBTQ journalism conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't believe that was just a year ago.
Just a year ago in Philadelphia. And Charles and I got to be panelists on your panel, which was terrific.
You saved that wild panel. So, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Had, for folks who were not privy to that, to that discussion or were not in the room, we had one panelist who very much, we'll say, went rogue.
A little bit.
Yeah, Martha did a great job of coordinating with me, if you will, in real time to keep kind of reeling her in and, keeping us on topic and keeping us moving along.
Yeah, it worked out well. It felt very collaborative.
Yeah, and it was. And it definitely, I was like, oh, this is a podcasting pro right here. Because in a podcast, it's a very yes and medium, right? You always have to be ready and quick and present.
I never really thought about the yes and nature of it, but that is absolutely correct.
Yeah, it is.
Because sometimes you'd have things just happen sometimes.
I had a client tell me, you taught me the word and I'm like, what are you talking about? And it was, someone said something like, sometimes you come off as intimidating. And I said, and? It's like, did you ever think that's, expedient? I'm not trying to be distant, but I'm busy, at work. And it was like, no, but that was brilliant. Now I know the word and. I don't have to explain myself. I'm where are you going with this? So I love it as a question to and.
You're such a role model, Martha.
Thank you.
And it's so
likewise, my friend.
It's so much more positive than what I normally do, which is so.
Yeah.
I'm very much a so kind of person, so I appreciate that.
What a difference a word makes.
Right.
Truly. I think it's like the Jersey in you, though. Jersey is very, so what? So
it is.
For me, that's the Philly in me.
Right. And you
have the neck to a so.
Philadelphia and South Jersey are kind of one big place.
True, actually.
Oh, yeah.
We get a little money in the neighborhoods in Philly and come over to Jersey. I, on the other hand, grew up here in Jersey and then went to Philly for 35 years. So, and then came back with the pandemic, and here we are. So,
which is part of the whole full circle thing.
The whole full circle thing. I'm back in the house where it all began. Yeah.
There you go.
So that's us. We had the absolute honor of being early readers of this work. It moved me incredibly because this is such a real account of what is going on. It's unvarnished. It is not, as much as I know that you as a human have a point of view, this was really letting the folks you talked with speak for themselves and tell us who they were. And that is world-class storytelling. And, I'm in love with this book. I've been so excited that about us coming to this place where folks finally will have access to it.
Yes.
Yeah. So your baby is about to be born.
I know. I've been pregnant for 2 years, and finally,
you really have.
This child's coming out. I keep referring to this as my prepartum depression era, where you've been pregnant for a long time, your ankles are swollen, you have this giant thing inside you, and you just want it out. So I am ready. I am very ready to finally be a mother.
Yay! So I want to go back to. I'm not going to speak for you. Clearly, there was reason this book had to be written. Can you talk a little bit about that? What gave you the, not just the idea, but the wherewithal to travel the country and, have these conversations?
Sure. I think really for me, what it came down to is that I had the access and the resources to write this book and it needed to be written. So I just had a responsibility to do it because I've been doing this work for such a long time. I know so many of families of trans kids already. Like I've been an LGBTQ plus journalist for over 10 years. I've been working with families of trans kids for 8 years. I know families across the country, they like trust me, they love me. Like we're like friends, many of them. You're not really supposed to be friends with your sources, but it's kind of inevitable if you stay in touch with people for such a long time. Like you watch their kids grow up, you get like photos and updates when they're like graduating from high school or graduating from college.
Right.
There's this like camaraderie and this, even more importantly, this trust that was built in. And I had a sense that if I had that trust already and I didn't have to work for it the way that some other journalists coming into this like might, that I could do something really special with that I could go so much deeper and just give people like a more interesting book, not like a better book, but just like something that would like get to this richness that might otherwise be lacking. So if I could do it, I knew that I had to. And I knew I particularly had to because of everything that we're seeing during this like awful political moment that we're all living through. More than 650 bills this year were put forward across the country targeting trans people, the majority target trans youth.
Yeah.
And through that, we very rarely focused on the impact on these kids' daily lives. Like, how are they feeling all through all this? How are they getting through it? How are they experiencing it? How are they trying to figure out how to be a person, like when all this stuff is happening? Because imagine that you are a child growing up in the shadow of people hating you, right? And using that like politicized hate to try to keep you from having rights. And this has always been the way for trans kids, right? And for trans adults. They've always known this to be true. But it just feels like it's become so much more upfront and so much more organized now than maybe we've seen in some like previous decades. And kids are really like dealing with the brunt of it. And I wanted to put them at the center of their own narratives. We've very rarely heard from them about what they think about all this. And there's so much value to like learning about the lives of trans kids and like how they're like not only experiencing this moment, but how they experience the world. Like to me, like we've treated these kids as if they're like not human or they experience the world differently than the rest of us, but they're just kids and they're just people like trying to like go about their lives. And I really just wanted to remind people of that. It's a really like sad political goal to have to remind people of the humanity of trans kids, but here we are.
Truly it is. And, that is the biggest fight as I see it. Um, Beyond the political nonsense, and we can get into that a little bit, but the biggest fight is simply the idea that we are real. We exist regardless of how you decide to talk about us. It's always been thus, and I've got a couple trans elders who I'm really close to who did transition early 1970s. And they're like, we didn't fear in the same ways. We were not a political football. We were rare and walking around, and there weren't many of us, and they might look at us like we're freaks, but they let us be, by and large, as compared to this onslaught of, I think, misguided, outdated already rhetoric. And it's like, I have to ask myself time and time again, it's why we started this podcast. Why are you even doing this?
Right.
Is this the last group of people to hate? Is that how this works? Because I think, the boomerang effect, if you will, to all of this nonsense is we've got Americans, decent, thoughtful, fair-minded Americans who know a lot more about trans people than they ever did because of these jackasses and the harm that they are causing.
Yeah, I think that's true. But one of the reasons I believe that they've been able to exploit trans people politically the way they have is because still, even with so many advances and like visibility and education, like these incredible trans people who are out like living their lives publicly, like the Laverne Coxes of the world, the Elliot Pages of the world, they're still like so much like lack of education that's out there. Like I was
Right.
just reading a poll this week from the Public Religion Research Institute that only 11% of Americans know a trans person. And it's actually even smaller than that because some of those people are trans people who know themselves, right? So you can then shave off another like 1% or 1.6% of that. So
Right.
that leaves you with around like, 10 or like 9.4 if we want to be really like granular about it. So that's not a lot of people that have someone in their lives who's trans. And when you have like that like kind of lack of knowledge at such a widespread scale, it creates this, or that it means that there's this vacuum that can be filled
Yes.
with like hatred, with misinformation, with stigma. And because there are so few people like gatekeepers, like people in power who are fighting that misinformation, like it's really allowed it to flourish. And that's why one of the many reasons that a book like this needed to exist, because like it then becomes like incumbent on all of us to do what we can to speak back to it, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you fight misinformation, but with good information, right? But with like humanizing people, but by showing people that they're real. Like, I really heard what you said about that the fight is to still prove that like trans people exist. And I think that there are so many people who still don't know that and don't understand that because they don't have someone in their lives to humanize that, to literalize the struggles of trans people for them. So it just becomes then incumbent on storytellers to do that kind of work to help get people's stories out there.
Absolutely.
And that's another reason why your book is so valuable, because one of the big catchphrases that gets bandied about all the time with this onslaught is, we're protecting the children, we're worried about the children. And it's like, it's very obvious that you have never met a trans child, you have no idea what that experience is like, and have you ever met a child? Because it's like they have this like theoretical, fictionalized, romanticized version
Right.
of what the being a child is. And it's like, that's never been the case for any walking human ever. And nothing that you're pushing actually benefits any child ever. And if I thought that these people actually read books, I would put a copy in each of their hands so they could at least, get an actual idea of what the situation is like for these kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're getting to something really critical here because it's not just that these people don't know trans kids. That's true, they don't. But they also don't want to know trans kids because they've had the
That
opportunity to
part.
learn over and over and over again and have refused it. And I'm not talking about your run of the mill Republican, right? Just your next door neighbor who lives near you, right? We're not talking about that person. We're talking about Republican lawmakers who that you have dedicated advocacy groups like ACLU. The ACLU has branches in just about every state that are trying to do education work around this, messaging work. They're trying to meet with lawmakers. They're trying to provide them with better information. They're trying to get trans kids that they know, right, to come to like the legislature with them or to meet with lawmakers specifically to humanize these stories, to say like, you should meet a constituent who your policies impact. Please meet Timmy. He's a 7-year-old trans boy and he wants to be able to use the correct bathroom at a school.
Right.
They're not taking those invitations. Or if they go to the legislature, let's say like Ruby is a really great example. One of the kids in this book, she's an incredible young trans woman in Texas. She was brave enough to go speak at the legislature there to talk about how anti-trans policies affect her. And the lawmakers didn't listen. They were looking at the ceiling, they were looking at the floor, they were checking their emails, they were like staring at their cell phones, like, oh, isn't this so interesting? Rather than just like looking at her in the eye and acknowledging her humanity. Right. So it's not just that like Republican lawmakers don't know trans people and that's breeding a certain amount of like fear and misinformation. I think that's almost too passive here. Like they don't want to know trans people because then they wouldn't be able to do this. Right. Like they wouldn't be able to scapegoat and exploit trans people to consolidate their power in the way that they do. So it's a very unintentional ignorance here, at least on the part of lawmakers.
And it's also really important to note, this is not new.
No.
This is, queer people and trans people have experienced this for many years. People of color have experienced this for millennia. I mean, this is not new stuff. To point to a group of marginalized people, and True, the rarer the better. The less of them you might encounter, the easier it is to lie about them.
Right.
And create something to fear when we are the least scary people in the world. We are. I mean, come on. And that's the thing. I have these conversations all of the time. One of them recently was with a nurse trying to tell me that housing a trans person on a unit with, a trans woman with cis women who have, survived sexual assault, not a good thing. And I said, and why is that? How many of them were actually assaulted by trans women? And beyond that point, we are far more likely to be the victims of sexual assault above cis women than we are to be the perpetrators. And those are just the facts. And you need to know them if you're going to form a policy around your thoughts. And,
not an opinion, but a policy.
Right. Exactly. And the good news is most of the shit doesn't pass. Right. The good news is a lot of it dies in committee. The little bit that passes gets challenged immediately. Thank God for the ACLU. I light candles for Chase Strangio every day. May he stay in good health and full voice. Because there are people out there fighting the good fight. But one of the problems here, every time, a journalist wants to discuss, particularly in television journalism, every time you want to discuss trans people, I go back to nothing about us without us. If you don't have a trans person at that table, this is not a full discussion. You talking about my life is such bullshit that, I can't watch it. But, if you're trying to actually, put some balance into the situation, let's always have an expert, not just an expert, but let's have an actual trans person. And you did that.
Yeah.
You did that with, the young people who are most marginalized, who are afraid, who just want to be like another kid, the other kids. They just want to fit in. All of us can remember that part of childhood, of figuring out socialization and figuring out, where we belong. And I remember clearly, I'm 58 now. I clearly remember those moments of, if they just understood that I was a girl, I wouldn't be on the ground right now. If they just saw me as I am, instead of the way that they view me, I wouldn't have bruises, right? Because the other girls didn't get treated that way. But I was, I was something that they were not familiar with. And I still remember that feeling. And I think you capture that. Like the folks who are trying to legislate bathrooms, and it's one of the most backward things I've ever seen. Like, have you never been to a nightclub where there are 2 stalls and a line? Like, come on. But, this idea that we legislate the bathrooms and we're protecting the innocence of children, none of that is true. None of that is true. When we try to burn books or exclude books, what you're doing is saying, I don't want my child to be more empathetic, tolerant, or knowledgeable about people that I just don't like. And that to me is not protecting anyone. It never has, it never will. So, to be able to read the lived experience, and you went to how many different places across this country?
7 states. So 7 families in 7 states.
7 families in 7 states, different circumstances financially, support-wise, state-wise, what was happening. And they get to speak. Finally, they get to, you can sit with this book and you can pay attention and you can go back and reread that and understand the humanity. And that is the most important word I think you've said. Because, when we dehumanize others, we can do almost anything to them.
Mm-hmm.
And justify it.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting that you brought up before the way trans people are often silenced in discussions about their own lives, because that was a really critical influence in the way that the book was written, in terms of me not really being much of a character. Like, I sort of like pop in a little bit every now and then, but for the most part, I try to like be as fly on the wall as possible, while also, being a human presence. So you strike a balance there.
Right.
But so much of the book really focuses solely on the voices of these trans kids and on the experiences of these trans kids, to be almost sort of a character study of their lives, because there was a time under the Trump administration when they were, passing all these anti-trans policies and they were stripping away these protections. And you would read about what was going on in like the New York Times, or like less so the Washington Post, but definitely the New York Times. And they wouldn't quote a single trans person, like when talking about the impact of this policy. And it's like, if you want to understand the people who are being impacted by, Trump banning trans people from the military, you talk to trans people in the military, or you talk to trans people who are paying attention to this and are worried they're going to come after them next, right? Like, there are ways that you can like humanize that discussion and also like center the voices of the people who are actually impacted here. And it just wasn't happening over and over again. It still happens in reporting on trans people. And you said it best. Like, when you take away someone's voice, when you take away someone's humanity, you can justify doing almost anything to them. And here, in responding to that kind of erasure, I really wanted to start not with like, we often start with like Trans 101 when we do education, where it's like, well, these are the words that you need to use. These are the pronouns that people use, and, defining things for people. All that stuff is super important. Like, as somebody who uses they, them pronouns, I am all up on pronoun discussions. I love them. They're great. But we often skip over the part where we just explain that trans people are human, they're people, and they deserve to be treated like people. And I keep saying over and over again that it's really sad that we're having to do that. But that's, in a sense, where the discussion needs to start. And by spending time with these kids, by like following along their day with them as they like go to school, as they like sit in the cafeteria at lunch eating with their friends, as they like do their homework, as they get ready for prom, and do all these like kind of mundane, boring things, like you can stop, like you can break down this barrier that exists in your mind between the two of you, where it's like you're on one side and you lead this kind of life, and they're on the other and they lead this kind of life, and the twain shall never meet. You could never have anything in common with this person.
Right.
You probably have a lot more in common than you think, right? You probably were a kid like this.
Right.
Even if you weren't trans, I imagine that there's a lot that you might like see of yourself in that person. But also, I think there's been this line in queer politics for a while that we deserve rights because we're the same as you, right? You saw that in the marriage equality fight, like this sort of like same love moment of like, oh, our relationships are the same, our lives are the same, so please give us rights because we're the same as you. I get that. I understand we are the same in a lot of ways, and those ways are important. We should talk about them. But I don't want to just have rights because I'm the same as other people. I want to have rights because I deserve rights. And it's the same with these kids. They deserve rights because like they are a person who exists in the world, who has their own unique experiences, and through their literal birth has inalienable privileges that are like guaranteed by their own constitution. And I think we've somehow like forgotten that people can be their own people and make their own choices and still be deserving of rights. They can make choices that are different than the choices that you could make or that you would make. They can be unlikable. You can there was a trans woman I just wrote about in prison who just won the right to like gender affirming surgery in Indiana, and people in the comment section kept asking like, oh well, what did she do? Like, why is she there? As if they don't like the answer, then like she doesn't deserve that surgery.
Exactly.
When there is literally a right to medical care in prison for everybody, right? And if we are asking, do we like this person? Do we agree with their choices? We are missing the point. And it's the same with these kids, that so like many readers early on kept talking about like people they did like or didn't like, or stories they related to or didn't relate to. I almost feel like that's beside the point. I just want people to know about what's going on in these kids' lives, to better understand it, and to support their right to exist and to have rights, whether or not they relate to it or not. Like, I kind of hope that like people don't relate to this book in some ways, right? That they'll read certain chapters and not relate to it whatsoever, but go like, I want the best for them anyway. Like, I hope they get everything that they deserve. Like, I think that that's when we like make a little bit of progress here, rather than insisting that we all need to be the same to have dignity.
Right. Yeah, because that's the thing. That's the conversation that I really wish we as a people, I mean, a full whole people, would recognize and have. Rights are not anyone's to give or to take.
Well, right. And if you're measuring my access
right
to care based on whether or not you like me or you can relate to me,
right
that's not a right, is it? That's you.
No.
That's you thinking that you get to determine my humanity. You get to decide how I will be human. And that, we always come back to that idea of you somehow think you know me better than I can know myself. And that, if that's not the height of arrogance, I don't know what is.
And the irony of it is, if we use that rubric that, being likable determines whether or not you have rights, then half the people that are fighting to take them away would immediately be stripped of them.
Right. I mean, I adore the folks who say, where did queer culture go? Why are we metering it so that we find ourselves more acceptable? If assimilation is your goal, have at it. If that's what you want. I mean, we literally do have a picket fence, but it's ironic. Okay.
It's a statement fence.
It kind of is. Like
it kind of is.
Ossie and Harriet. Like, I don't know. But thinking back to what you just said about prom, etc., the rites of passage of cis heteronormative people are almost always negative situations, or have been historically. Everything everyone else was looking forward to, I dreaded, like prom, like games, sports, you name it. There wasn't a place for me as a young person. And so all of those things that everybody got to take for granted were unsettling. They were one more example of how I did not fit. And that still happens. That still goes on. I love to celebrate the places where, okay, this is my friend and they happen to be trans, or they happen to be non-binary. But, I've had young people stop me and say pronouns, because they want to, it's just the way that they communicate. I will be able to more effectively communicate if I understand how you see yourself. It's a brilliant thing that, at least to me, is relatively new, but a lot of young people insist on it. But I also recognize we live in a bubble. New Jersey, California, you as well. We're in these places where what is perfectly logical and protected is on the table, throughout this nation. And I counsel folks who are deeply affected by reading about legislation, deeply affected by, what is happening and will it come here and what would it take? And, one federal election can really, and did in 2016, cause a lot of problems for us. We can't necessarily trust anything. And, I do a yes and with that, right? A yes, like, yes, these things are real. And you are not in immediate danger. So how can we help the folks who are? What can we do? And, it's not highly publicized and good, but there are plenty of organizations who are reaching out, who are finding very creative ways to still serve these folks and keep them in care and alive. And I'm just grateful that that is true, even as we wrestle with all of these things happening.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to overstate my own impact here, because I think that can seem a little egotistical, but I do hope that a resource like this can do that kind of work of keeping people here. That so many of the kids in the book had really struggled with suicidal ideation, right? That they had wondered to themselves, like, do I have a place here? Do I even want to be here anymore? Ruby in Texas, her parents had to take all the sharp objects out of her house at one point before she began her medical transition, and started sort of really coming into her own confidence, because they were so worried about, like, whether they would have a daughter in a few years, or at the time a child, but a daughter in a couple of years.
Right.
And then in Florida, Jack, it's the Florida chapter is about two siblings, one who is trans and the other who's non-binary. And the older girl, Jack, who's trans, she was one of the kids who was on Medicaid. That's how she got her gender affirming care. And in 2022, I believe, sometimes this like the timelines of all this like get a little fuzzy to me. The state decided that you could no longer like fund like trans youth medical care through Medicaid. You were cut off. So she lost her health care. And for 5 months, she went without it.
Right.
And during that time, her mom thought her heart was just going to stop in her sleep. And, Jack would have a hard time like waking up every day and just deciding to get out of bed, deciding to be like a person in the world. Like it wasn't even that she like struggled with suicidal ideation, as that she just like felt like she just might cease to exist at any moment. Like the world was so crushing, she thought it would just crush her. And so many kids are experiencing this because like for every one of these policies that's passed in Texas, like that's not just Ruby that's going through this. This isn't just Jack that's going through this. This is countless kids whose mental health is being impacted, whose ability to exist in the world is being impacted, who just might like also be wondering like, do I even want to be here anymore? And might be like looking for reasons to stay. So I hope that this book, in like some really small way, by showing other kids who have gone through this, and who are still like leading lovely lives and have still like found like hope and joy at the end of the thing that they went through, that it's a reminder that like other people can get through it too. Like if there's a possibility model like here, right? That if these people did it, and they found a way to stick around, you can do the same thing for yourself. Because I don't think we've really discussed, like as a community, the mental health crisis of all of this anti-trans legislation, right? Like how many people are struggling right now. Like, and this isn't just trans kids, this is trans adults who are seeing what's happening to their community, who are seeing the ways in which trans people are being like vilified and demonized right now. And like, there's a part of them that are going, fuck this, pardon my French, but like, fuck this, right? Like, how, like, do you invest in a society that isn't investing in you, that like, it feels like doesn't want you to be here.
Right.
So I just know so many like people in my community, even in like my friend groups, like who have a really hard time every year when, January starts, you get this fresh new wave of anti-trans legislation. And, at the end of it, you just feel so spent. You feel like you don't have anything like left for people. And I just hope that, whether it's through reading this book or like relying on community or reaching out to resources like the Trevor Project or Trans Lifeline, that people just find a way to keep going, because like we need each other. It's not going to be like anybody else but each other who are going to like lift us up right now, right? And we need as many queer people in the world as we can get, because we need all the support that we can get.
Absolutely. The note I just made to myself was the importance of representation. The program that I run here in New Jersey is centered around addiction and co-occurring mental health, exclusively, in my program for the LGBTQIA plus community. And, we are grant funded through our state. And one of the mandates of the grant, in their wisdom, is that the folks running this and leading this must be from the community. And so my therapy partner, Nicole, is an out lesbian, and I'm me. And time again, the thing that we do differently is understand our clients on a level other folks don't, just because it's our lived experience too. And, there is a shorthand. I've run monthly community events just for trans and non-binary folk to meet one another. And I'm like, I need you to leave here with a Facebook friend, a phone number, or an email address that you didn't have when you got here. That's what I ask of you. And in the meantime, eat spaghetti and chat and go play cornhole and do whatever.
Oh my God, you guys call it cornhole there.
Yeah. But
don't get me started.
But it's
bags, everyone. But continue,
right.
Sorry.
Community building is such an important part of it. And so we're seeing outcomes no one sees in this field. Because when you see people and you recognize them and you let them know it's okay to be who they are, that is transformative in itself. I think the magic of this book is that you're a non-binary human who gets it. That there is an automatic shorthand in the conversations you are having with these kids that just helps them to open up, that just helps them to say, I'm seen. I already know I'm seen. I don't have to tell Nico, what it's like to be in this head, because Nico has a very good working knowledge of gender expansiveness, of questioning your gender, of having to figure out what it is and how it fits in this world, and what is the language around that. Um, that's the difference with this book. I can't tell you how many times we reference an article each week, and you wrote it.
Yep.
It's just like, I'll start reading the first paragraph, and then I'll look back to see who it's your byline, time and time and time again, because I'm like, this is a brilliant piece that I want to talk about. Of course, it's Nika's, because that makes a difference. A cishet writer is not going to have the same level, in my mind, of storytelling, because they don't get the story they're telling. The example I gave was Brendan Fraser was recently in that movie, The Whale, a year or two ago, won an award. And in his acceptance speech, he said, "This is not a queer story. This is a universal story." And to which I said, "Motherfucker, it is a queer story. Cishet people don't lose their job, their livelihood, and their social standing based on who they love or how they love. This is a queer story. You can't recognize it because you're looking for universality in in your work. And because you have not lived as that person, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Exactly. So please sit down. But don't tell me what queer storytelling is." So there is an authenticity that rings through your words, through every piece you write, that just makes this a powerful work, because you know what the hell you're talking about.
Right. And the book wouldn't work as well otherwise, because it would be like Jane Goodall and the Gorillas in the Mist, and the kids would smell that right away.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That is one thing resounding about our community. We know what authenticity looks like and smells like, because so many of us have had to live our lives on guard. And, you don't touch on the humanity without connection. Connection is so important. And, you took those connections that you have made through time doing this important work and brought something even more brilliant and poignant and important out of that. I like it when we can look at our lives and say, I didn't waste a moment, because I've been building these things, and then I can do something even bigger because of the work I've done. And
yeah, oh, go ahead. No, please.
Your life is on purpose. It is on purpose. It's such an honor to know you, even as we do across the country, because, you were an example of that. What authenticity, the power of authenticity, the power of storytelling, and the power of telling our own stories, not trying to hide behind being, I don't know, a music writer or something. You're like, no, I'm going to go for this stuff because I know it. And you tell important stories every day. This one. Oh.
Yeah, and I loved actually what you both just said, and thank you for saying that. And I loved what you said, particularly about universality, because I talked a little bit. I don't know if you read the acknowledgments at the end, but I sort of wrote it as a little bit of therapy, because a note we kept getting over and over again was about like wanting to make sure that like the stories were universal, or sort of spoke to everyone, like that would speak to like all trans experiences. And you just can't do that because trans people are so different from each other.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, sure, like trans people are only like 1.6% of the population or whatever, but that's still a widely disparate group of people who have very little in common with one another, right? Except for the fact that they're trans, and even they're trans in totally different ways. Like,
right.
You, Martha, and I are occupy this community in different ways. I'm a non-binary person. I have a lot of like privilege in that, as somebody who like doesn't do a lot to like, I'm not very like, I just put on a shirt, like I'm like, clean shirt is good. And you as like a trans woman, like your experience of your own identity is going to be totally different than mine. So like to pretend that those two experiences are the same, or it's just cuckoo to me. So I didn't want to paint with a really broad brush here and say all these kids are the same, the things they go through are the same, because they are so wildly different from one another. And when I was writing the book, I like really dug into that difference. Like I wanted to make them as different from each other as humanly possible because I wanted to give, readers a really interesting experience where the book's always surprising you and it's changing you and the stories almost like conflict with one another because if one kid tells you this thing, another kid's going to tell you something completely different, right? Even their relationship to their transness, right? Some of these kids, it's really important to them. Other kids, it's not a thing for them at all. They don't like see themselves as trans. They just see themselves as like who they are.
Right.
And both of those ways of being are like totally valid. But I think the thing is that when you let stories just be what they are, when you dig into those particularities, when you make them just as like unique and idiosyncratic as they are, that's when they become universal because then so many types of people can still see themselves in that. Like just because like Clint's story is this like Muslim like South Asian story doesn't mean I can't relate to it. There's so much about that story I related to. About like intergenerational trauma, about like the expectations that parents have for their kids, that like grandparents like have for their like grandchildren, that like Maha, his mom, that like her parents had for her, that like I grew up in a household that was really controlling because of just a lot of trauma and stuff my grandparents had been through. So they thought that the best way to protect me was to like control me and to like, essentially keep me from interacting with the outside world. And we're all in like a great place now, right? And I love my family and we've all come a long way. But like when I heard so much from Maha about like her own relationship with her parents and the struggles that she had, like even like as a brown woman who, has such different life experiences than I do in some other ways, like I was like, this is me. Like I was that teenager. Like I dealt with the same stuff in the same way that she did, but also in a different way. So I think that like by letting things just be what they are and not trying to tell us like all stories are the same, there's still a universality there. And by putting so much of those, so many of those particularities into this book, like I do think it becomes really universal because no matter who you are, there's gonna be something in this book that you can grab onto. There's gonna be something where you can say, that's like me, or that's like a kid that I know,
Right.
or that's like my friend's kid, right? There's gonna be something that you can pull out. So I really hope we get to this point where we stop insisting that like all queer stories need to be applicable to everybody to be valid. No, sometimes they can just be our stories, but people can see like themselves in our stories anyway.
Absolutely, because the through line, the connection is that word humanity, right? Is that what that we are all human? That is our connection. We are all having this human experience. So there are many, many more overlaps than there are differences. The problem comes in when we refuse to respect the differences. I am differently human than you, and then Charles, and then the woman across the street. We are as diverse as any other segment of the population. The problem is when we try to create monoliths, right? All Black people are,
Yeah.
all trans people are, all gay people are. And, they accuse us of identity politics. I think you're going to hear that phrase a little bit about this book. I want to say fuck whoever says it, but because we didn't start identity politics. It's not a thing that we do. It's a way for you to dismiss us. When we insist that we are the ones who need to tell our own stories, whether it be based on our race, our gender, our financial situation, our place in the cast, whatever it is, our lived experiences are ours. And no one can tell my story better than me. So, that dismissive phrase, I think we're going to see it a little bit here.
It's right up there with playing the race card.
Right. Because it's a way to not have to dig deeper. Right? It's a way to say, oh, well, they just want this based on their identity. And it's like, no, I want you to respect my identity. I want you to allow. I want you to back off my rights.
That part.
I don't actually give a shit if you tolerate me, but I would appreciate a live and let live place here where, my rights are as affirmed as yours, because you're kind of an asshole too, but you have full access and have never had to have them challenged by people like you.
I think that's the way that needs to be rephrased and reframed. It's not give me my rights, it's back up off of my rights.
Yeah.
Because my rights have always been there and always will be there, because again, they were not yours to give or to take away. They just are because I am.
Right. And we get in all kinds of trouble as humans when we think that we do. Like, we are being so thoughtful. I love the gays. No, you don't.
Uh-huh.
You probably don't.
That's what I'm with. I don't see color.
I don't see color. Yeah. So one of the silliest questions
There's one.
Someone asked me one time was like, okay, you're trying to tell me that y'all are people. What about Folsom Street? And I'm like, what about it? And yeah.
Who said that?
It doesn't matter. Someone.
That's just so weird. Like, what a non sequitur.
Right. But it was like, there is an idea there. And that's why I've remembered it, because the idea is that as a minority or as a part of a marginalized group, you are responsible for the worst of your people. And when you want to challenge my prejudice against you, you've got to speak to what I consider the worst of it and explain it to me. And I'm like, you first. You explain John Wayne Gacy, and I'll explain Folsom Street. How about that? How about that?
God, explain me Jerry Falwell, and then let's go.
Right.
Bam.
Right. You folks manufacture the pedophiles. It's actually not us. And you were the ones walking around as children's genital fetishists. That's not us. You like to point at us, but that's always the thing, is like, there's a bad one. See, I told you. Like, what the fuck is that? Okay, bad human. Got it.
We're lousy with them.
Right. I mean,
I would just tell that person, go to Folsom. He might actually enjoy it. It's pretty fun.
Well, that's usually the problem.
Right.
And it was a she, but that's usually the problem, is there's something fascinating in all that. I'm missing out, and I'm going to criticize it because Jesus, or something.
Somewhere someone's having a good time, and I have a problem with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, if we could all just take a breath. And, one of the things I wanted to mention to you, right now, and I'm starting to see connections. I'm starting to see associations made from the people who understand that the fight for bodily autonomy is one fight. The fight for trans rights is the fight for reproductive rights. These are both about having agency over one's own body. We don't argue with all the cis people who go get plastic surgery. We don't argue with, the men who want to make their dick bigger. We don't fight with any of that. It's perfectly okay. But God forbid we, do anything, pretty much. But it's the same fight. And I'm starting to see some natural alliances there, which, flies in the face of turfism, thank God, where, your fight is mine. We're talking about the same thing. Your right to an abortion and my right to whatever healthcare I deem appropriate for me. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same control over humans we somehow deem lesser and incapable of making decisions about their own lives. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting that you said this, because I just did a story on the Gender Liberation March. The folks behind that had another rally in Washington, D.C. Yeah,
Sorry,
another rally in Washington, D.C. Because they marched. It was from the Franklin Memorial or something,
Mm-hmm.
Washington Monument, one of those things, some famous Washington, D.C. landmark.
To one of the
and they marched to the Heritage. Yeah, one of the giant penises. They marched to the Heritage Foundation, and they had this party and DJ set outside the Heritage Foundation.
Good.
And one of the things that really struck me in talking to the organizers for the story that I did for them, which you should go read, was Jennifer Gutierrez, who's a longtime friend of mine. Yeah, you did. She organizes with Familia TQLM, which does a lot of advocacy around like immigrants and migrants to the U.S. And undocumented workers, and also people who are held in lockup facilities because of their immigrant status,
Right.
right? And she said something to me that really that is going to stay with me forever. That like this issue of bodily autonomy, of deciding what happens to your body, is also an immigrant issue. Because if you were held in a lockup facility for no other reason than that you wanted to come to the country and you had to, because we don't have a functional immigration system. So like right now, if you want to do it like quote unquote legally, you really can't, because there's not that many like avenues for you to do it. Like as like say like a Mexican person like or Honduran fleeing violence, right? You pretty much have to cross the border and just like see what happens, right?
Yeah.
And if you are the, a trans Latino held in that system, not only are you behind bars, so like you're not deciding what happens to your body in that way, but you're often denied gender affirming care. You're denied like access to just like basic medical care, like HIV care. Roxana Hernandez died in a lockup facility because she had been denied her HIV care, I believe, for 8 days at the time of her death.
Right.
Like that all of that is part of the same fight. Like that is the fight for bodily autonomy. And it really helped me think about all this stuff in a new way, where I feel like I'm starting to see so many like fights now, or so many justice movements, as being part of the fight for bodily autonomy, right? Look at like even like what Black folks experience in the US in terms of being shot by police. If you are suspected of doing this thing that you didn't do, that is also, in a way, its own fight for bodily autonomy. Because if you are being shot by a police officer for something that has nothing to do with you, you are not deciding what happens to your body. You are not deciding like whether or not there are bullets in it for no reason.
Correct, yeah.
Right? So there are so many ways that we all are part of each other's same movements, that we are all allies to each other, that we all like experience the same like disempowerment, or people deciding that we don't deserve rights anymore because they don't like us or they don't agree with the choices we make. So I hope that the gender liberation march, or even in a smaller way this book, just reminds us to show up for each other. That like a bunch of allies are going to read this book, right? It's not just for like queer people and trans people.
I agree.
I see that as being very much like our core readership, right? Or like the people I really want this book to be for are like my community. But there are going to be allies. There are going to be like cis heterosexual people who read this, and I hope it's just a reminder, or like a call to like join the fight, right? To like do what they can to protect these kids, to fight for these kids. Because if you read these books or this book, I mean, who knows? It could be multiple books, but for now, just one. If you read this book, I mean, you care about what happens to them. You care about their ability to have a future. Like, get organized, volunteer, donate to some organization, vote. Like, it is very clear who you should vote for if you like want the best for these kids and their futures. Like,
yeah,
go do it. Don't sit this out. Like, we need you.
Right.
The choice could not be more clear. Couldn't be more clear. And we have a lot more information in 2024, even than we had in 2016. That debacle never should have happened if anyone was paying attention at all. However, it did. But now we can't say we don't know all of that and just how ugly it would be. And I have to believe, and you talk to way more people than I do, but I have to believe that the soul of this nation is better than that, because that's what I see every day. I see, reasonableness. And if we only, take a look at social media and the comment section, if that's where we're deciding what humanity is, it's a sewer.
Yeah.
But that has never been, my face-to-face experience. Never. Not at that level of dismissal, of absolutely denying one another humanity.
Right, because every time we have face-to-face conversations, that's when the real thing comes out, because people aren't really what they are online. Like, they actually have reason and logic.
Yeah. I mean, that's my experience. Again, I'm not in the Deep South. I'm not in a state where I'm being challenged. My existence is being challenged on such a fundamental level. But again, I do counsel the folks who are just impacted, the adults and the adolescents, who just don't know what to do with this. Right?
I was just gonna say, I don't know. I don't know where I stand in hope right now. You know, like obviously this book is very hopeful, and I found a lot of hope in these kids, but like get back to me after November. Like, you know, I
Well,
just think about all the time, like how wild it is to me that it's so hard to keep a rapist felon who like has been recently, convicted of what, 30 something felonies, 20 something felonies, right? Like, how hard can it be to keep this man from being president? And why is it so hard? Why does it take so much work to keep this person who obviously should not be running our country or any country from the White House? And it all has to do with like people's prejudices and biases, or the fact that they view, like, I don't know, like they view themselves and what they want from their lives as being like more important than other people. Like there's just so much like ignorance and erasure that's happening right now. There are so many people who still just aren't paying attention to this. In the opening of the book, we talk about the fact that even in like liberal communities, they aren't always like plugged into what's going on in the world. That Kai Shapley and her mom, when they moved to Connecticut, they would talk about all the things that were happening in Texas in their, like supportive, progressive, like, communities. And other mothers would say, like, oh, that doesn't sound right. That can't be happening. That can't be true.
Right.
When it's like, obviously it's true. There are many, many, many news stories about what's happening. You can literally just Google it. But everyone is still just so like stuck in their own bubble and stuck in their own world that they can't pay attention to like what's happening to other people out there. So like I think I was more hopeful in a way than when I started this book, but like I don't think I'll really know until after I see what happens in November. Like I feel
Yeah.
like in a way, oh, how do you say, like my own faith in us is hanging in the balance, I think is maybe the best way to put it.
That's
Like, yeah. So I hope things turn out well. Like I hope that like America can I don't know, li- live up to a sense of good faith, but I don't know right now.
so here's where I'm basing my optimism. Guarded, but my optimism
or as I say,
is
skeptical
when we
optimism.
look at, when we look at Republicans trying to spike the ball, right, and codify, this removal of Roe into the constitutions, folks are showing up and saying, no, it's too far. We had the survey of Republicans, regular rank and file Republicans, who a vast majority, like 80% in one way or another, said all this trans stuff has gone way too far. They've lost focus. There's no point to this. It's not right. That's what I'm talking about. So I keep seeing them lose in fundamental ways across this nation. And I keep seeing those kinds of results that tell me we're not as hated as some would like us to believe, There is not the vitriol in the numbers, it feels like, when you are only being inundated with what they proposed. Not what they were able to put through, but what they proposed. Even the DeSantis stuff, because we follow that pretty closely. It's like, if you, keep reading enough media in Florida, you're going to find out that most of it is him yelling at a wall.
Yeah.
He didn't win anything with Disney, regardless of how he tells the story. There's so many instances. And yet we do have that alleged medical association that is, informed what is the cast report, that Florida had the impact over in the UK, which is bullshit and ridiculous because these people are not talking about medicine. So it's a mixed bag. I'll give you that. I hear you. Because when you talk with folks about the consequences of this kind of nonsense, yeah, it challenges hope. But I am still hopeful. I am seeing a renewed sense of hope, a renewed sense of political engagement among people who were kind of not going to almost going to sit this out. So my hope is the Republicans sit it out, because he doesn't have the rank and file support that I think we kind of tend to believe, because we're looking at monoliths too. We're saying they're all the same, and they're not.
Right.
They're not. I can't find a lot of common ground with them. But we are, there are still reasonable people in the world that look at a situation and say, that's not okay. Talking about other people's rights, it doesn't, it has nothing to do with me. Nothing at all. That's where I hope we get. And I think this book helps us get closer to it. I do. I hope people pick it up and read it. I hope they circulate it. I hope I see professors assigning it.
Yes.
Because it's an important read. And, it's, I always love your bylines. I always love the work you do. I love the humanity you put in every story. And the queer voice that you have absolutely added to our world. It's so important. And, I'm so excited. I feel like the godmother.
You can be my godmother if you want. I don't have one, so, I'm looking.
I love it. I love it. Talk to me about tour dates. You're going to kind of be visiting our coast soon. Is that correct?
Yeah, I will be. Oh my God, let me look at my spreadsheet so I don't speak out of turn. I don't remember anything if it's not in a spreadsheet. Okay. So I will be in Baltimore, which isn't very far. On the 28th, which is a Saturday.
Great.
I'm at the Baltimore Book Fair. Jabari Lyles, who is an incredible local, Black. I believe Jabari identifies as non-binary, so I'm going to say non-binary.
Okay.
Activist who's done incredible work in the community for a really long time. They were gracious enough to host a Q&A discussion with me, and we're going to be there hanging out outside of Red Emma's, which is an incredible local bookstore that's been so supportive of this book and of the conversation. And I'm just really excited. It's kind of funny that Baltimore of all places would be my first stop on this tour. It wasn't what I expected necessarily,
right.
But given that it's the birthplace of John Waters and this movement of queer and trans weirdos, we've been doing this little John Waters deep dive, my husband and I. It feels fitting in a way. It feels like being connected to history and this history of these queer forefathers and foremothers and foretheys who have come before me. So it just it feels like
I love that. I have a new word.
Foretheys.
Continue.
Foretheys.
Love that. Thank you.
So I'm excited. And then after that, we're going to be, for people who are listening to this from other places, we're going to be just about everywhere. We'll be in Portland. We'll be in suburban Dallas. We'll be in Los Angeles, New York, Boston, San Francisco, San Jose, Atlanta, Cincinnati, Salt Lake City, Little Rock, Seattle, Washington, D.C., Miami, and Sioux Falls. And that's just what we have lined up right now. That's not in addition to all the other things I'm in conversation for. I'm talking about something in Jackson, Mississippi next year. I'm organizing Zooms. I am doing everything I can to make sure this book gets out there because I think it's really special and it's about darn time that these kids' voices were heard.
That's amazing.
Coming to a town near you, Joe.
And I agree with you. I want to get a Philadelphia date on that calendar somehow, somewhere. I'm behind that idea.
I'm trying.
Just putting it out in the universe.
Giovanni's room. Yeah.
We could do it at Giovanni's room. We could do it at the William Way Center. There are so many angles that we could take. But I'm going to formally invite you to come on to Transway. So Transway is the Zoom call that I run every Thursday night, 7:30 Eastern time, where a bunch of trans and non-binary folk get together and support one another. That's what Transway is and does. And if we can ever find a Thursday evening where you could come and join us and talk about this work, and I am committed to buying a copy of the book for each and every one of the people that show up to that. So hopefully we can carve out a little time for that to happen.
I wish we'd done it yesterday. I didn't have anything to do this Thursday.
God damn it! I didn't know.
So no, it's okay. We'll figure out a date. I'll send you over my little book date schedule because it really is just. I'm going to be traveling a lot. It's funny. I went from I didn't want to travel at all, and I still kind of really don't. But there's been so much interest in the book, and people just sort of want your physical presence there. They want you to bring the book to them. That it's just if this is what I got to do, I got to do. So I'm going to spend probably the better part of the next year doing this and making sure that we're bringing it to local communities and starting those conversations. Right. So that's a long-winded way of saying, if we can figure out a Thursday, girl, I'm there.
Okay. I love it.
I think that's going to be such an exciting time for you, this book tour, man.
So we're
Really
gonna.
do.
I do too. We're gonna post all the links that you send us. Is there a favorite way to buy the book?
Yes. My hometown local bookstore is called Joseph Beth, and they have it for sale. They better because I'm doing an event there next month. So if they didn't, I would be very mad at them. So please support Joseph Beth. I think they're really great. If you look at it and you're like, I don't know, I don't trust this bookseller I've never heard of. Bookshop.org is great. It's a great way to buy it online. And I think proceeds go to supporting local booksellers. I'm not sure how it works, but I know it's very like pro indie bookstore. And if you prefer buying stuff in person, this book, as of October 8th, is going to be in most indie bookstores across the country because we were an Indie Next and an Indies Introduced pick. So it sort of gets you automatic distribution in all of these different bookstores. So please go hit up your local bookseller, ask them if they've got it. And if they don't have it, request it.
Yes.
That's how bookstores stock books is somebody asks for it, then they order it in, the bookseller's like, oh, this seems interesting, I'll order some more copies to see if there's a readership for it, and they find out there is. So please request it at your local bookstore. That would be awesome for me. Means I got to do a little less work.
Perfect. Nico, it's so good to see you. I just want to thank you so much for this time. It has been a long time coming, and it's so I'm so excited.
And I don't want to go without mentioning the fact that Nico, we've mentioned repeatedly how we keep running across your byline when we read an interesting article. I want to shout out your work with many publications like Them and the like, and also I would suggest our listeners support your Patreon. Please support LGBTQ journalism. You have informed, our podcast a lot.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I subscribe to the Patreon and I'm always getting the emails and I'm like, ooh, yes, we need to talk about that. Ooh, that too. So you are stitched into the fabric of Full Circle, the podcast, I must tell you.
You truly are. And you make my life so much easier because it's right that you're doing so much of the work all of the time. Please give Christian a huge hug for us. Your delightful husband.
Yes.
And
he's the best.
I am
friend of the pod.
And friend of the pod. And I think we're going to have to try to show up in Baltimore or New York with, I believe it's going to be Baltimore because it's a Saturday, with our books in hand.
Please come to the Baltimore one because the New York one, it's in a bookstore that's quite small, so seating is more limited. Okay. And the Baltimore one, that's outside, so we can have fun, we enjoy, and personally, I ain't got shit to do in Baltimore, so we can hang out.
I love it. Maybe I can get my buddy Elizabeth Williams, who
oh yeah,
John Waters.
We just watched one of her movies.
Yeah, to come on down and hang out a little bit. That'd be fun.
I felt very cool for a second because when she popped up on screen in Polyester, I got to point to that. I was like, that woman, I'm friends with her on Facebook.
Right.
So I earned some cool points with my husband for a second. I felt very awesome.
Elizabeth, by the way, is the facilitator of Transway. So we work together on that project. So yeah. Yep.
I love that.
It's a little world, but a big one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the best things about being queer, I think, is that fact that we're all so connected to each other. It feels cool.
Yeah, it does.
In one way or that way.
But it does.
Well, thank you both for this. I really appreciate this. And I just appreciate the chance to hang out with you guys and talk about the book. And just, I'm glad that we finally got to do it.
I am too. The last thing I want to say is when I saw that, Susan Stryker and Julia Serrano were interviewed and mentioned on the cover, I was like, yep, because we've talked to them both and I adore them. So it's
full circle,
all full circle, so much full circle in this book. Again, to my mind, the most important read of 2024. And, I hope it reprints and reprints and reprints and we can get it into a lot of hands. Nico Lang, thank you so much for your time. We love you.
Yes, we do.
And we're gonna see
Love you guys too.
We're gonna see you real soon.
Yeah. What a fun way to end. But thank you, new God Mommy and God Daddy. I appreciate this.
We do too. Have a great rest of the day, and get out there and buy the book.
Yeah.
Do it.
Full Circle is a Never Scared Productions podcast, hosted by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal, produced and edited by Never Scared, executive produced by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal. Our theme and music is by the Jingleberries. All names, pictures, music, audio, and video clips are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective copyright holders.